Our next speaker is a PhD dropout. I hear a lot of people saying like genius, right? Other people being like so sad, but people who know genius, right? But his life took a turn after he quit his PhD. He became a Segway tour guide on the National Mall. And he would like to apologize to all of you for that right now. Please welcome, actually more so than I even, one of the organizers of the DC data community groups who's going to become much more active in the next year, right? Right? Pinky swear? All right, Mark is going to make you. Yes, we're going to hold you to it. Oh, I'm actually scared of Tommy for this threat. So with that, please welcome Alex.
Great. Thanks so much, Jared, for having me. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. My name is Alex. I'm going to be talking a little about code promotion in R. That's my Twitter handle if you want to tweet at me. And just a little about me. I lead the solutions engineering team at the company formerly known as RStudio, now known as Posit. And so my team, primarily what we preoccupy ourselves with is like taking stuff to production in both R and Python. So in your brains, we're going to rewind to like before David's talk, which was great, back to Mark's talk, because like these two talks are really like peas in a pod. So rewind your brain to like, oh, Mark's talk was so good. He taught me how to like do code in production. It was so good. So this talk is not going to be so much about R code. It's going to be sort of about the stuff you do around your R code to get it into production. So I have lived this life. You probably have lived this life. Your very intimidating boss comes to you and they're like, why is the dashboard down? This is not good. The meeting was today where we were supposed to look at the dashboard. The dashboard is down. It's because you made some update, you pushed some change, you did something, and you didn't quite check it through beforehand, right? So what we're going to talk about today is code promotion, which is generally sort of the sequence of things you want to do to put something into production in a way where it's protected, right? And so there are sort of two parts to that, and that is being able to test, validate, and sort of make sure the thing is ready before it goes up. So that's part one. And then part two is making sure it only goes up once you've done those things, right? You have a validation plan, and it only goes there once it's validated. So I will say this is a little bit of an advanced maneuver. And so I would suggest you do some other stuff first. So like writing good code is like really helpful. And Mark, I think, talked a bunch about that and also had some of these similar resources. Doing some basic project hygiene, right? Using projects, using correctly subpath kind of things. If you know what they forgot to teach you about R course, it's there. Using Git is good, and using RN probably would also be great. And I have resources here on all of these. They're on the slides linked if you want them later. But okay, let's say you've done all that. Now you're like ready to go, right? We're gonna do code promotion. So the first thing you need is 3 environments. You want a dev, a test, and a prod environment, right? This is like pretty. You probably heard about this before. We're gonna get a little deeper into like how to do it. But like dev, test, prod, right? You're gonna develop stuff in dev. You're gonna test it in test, and prod is for production. I have this little asterisk. Sometimes 2, depending on your use case, you can kind of smush dev and test together, right? Like those could be one environment where you do your development and your testing, but prod should like definitely be its own place. Okay, so you need 3 environments. And so how are these environments different, right? Like, so one big difference is how easily can you make changes in each of those environments, right? In dev and test, in dev in particular, you want to be able to iterate quickly. You want to be able to try stuff out. Prod, like no, right? Only things that have been really validated go into prod. Additionally, right, the level of validation, which sort of goes along with that, right? In dev, you're going to be trying things out. You're going to be testing them. Things might work. They might break. They might not work. That's fine. It's a sandbox, right? You want to be able to do that there. Stuff in prod, you want to have it validated. You validated it both for like, right, for data science, you need to validate it both for the like empirical correctness of what you're doing and the like code quality, right? That like this is going to stand up to some sort of scrutiny, some sort of rigor. And then the last thing that comes up a lot is sort of the realness of the analysis, right? Are you accessing real data, or is it some sort of fake data that you have instead because you don't want to have the real data in your dev environment? This is especially important if you're working with PII or PHI data, right? You got to think about, if you have a dev, that's great, where you can use real data, but it has to be really sandboxed in that case, right? So you can't get anything out. If you're doing like writes from what you're doing, are you actually like, you probably don't want to be like doing your testing and accidentally writing to the like real data, like that's bad. So you need to be able to figure out some way to not write to the real data as you're doing your development. And then the last piece is sort of like, if you're doing things that take a while to run, it can be really annoying to have that happen as you're trying to iterate quickly in your dev environment. So you may want to like do things like downsampling to be able to iterate quickly in dev in a way that you don't want to when you're going into production, obviously. So there's an R package called config. It's one of the like little loved R packages. It's one of my favorites. Actually, I should have brought it. One of my colleagues made a hex sticker for it. It has a fig on it, which I think is very clever. But it's a great package that lets you sort of differentiate environments in a variety of ways. And we'll get into exactly how that works. But the basic idea is, as usual, there is a YAML file, right? Going to production is just like YAML. It's just YAML all the way down. It's just YAML on YAML on YAML. So you take some YAML and you load the YAML into your R session, and that's how you do config. Great, cool. We'll get a little more into that in a minute. So the second thing you need then is a mechanism, right? You have your 3 environments, and you need a mechanism to go from one environment to the other, right? And so the broad class of mechanisms, obviously, is something called CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. You've almost certainly heard of it. Some of you may have heard of it, and it sounds extremely intimidating. It is not so bad, I promise. And in particular, today I'm going to be talking a little bit about GitHub Actions, which is one CI/CD tool. I like it because it's really easy to use. If you use GitHub, it's already right there. But there are lots of other options like GitLab, Azure DevOps, Jenkins. All of those are completely valid and work quite similarly. So I believe all of them are also YAML. It's YAML all the way down. So like, how does CI/CD work? You have like your CI/CD stuff, and it's watching your Git repo, right? It's watching for things to happen, right? Those are triggers. When those things get triggered, then like it goes off and does something, right? And we'll get into what exactly that means. But usually that something is either automated testing or a promotion from one place to another, right? Those are usually the two things that are going to happen when your CI/CD pipeline is triggered. Okay, now we're just going to show off some of this. So I'm going to go to, and the Wi-Fi has been a little spotty, so YOLO, here we go. This is a document that I've got. I'm going to render it. It is a Quarto doc, which I believe have been coming up a lot today because they're great. Oh, that did something interesting. As I said, YOLO. Let's see if this doc is here. And it is. So this is a little report based on the Palmer Penguins data set. If any of you know it, it's just a little toy data set in R. And so what you'll notice is that right up here, right, this is the dev configuration that I'm using, right? That's just like something I manually put in there. It's not like auto-generated. And it uses 166 data points. If any of you are familiar with Palmer Penguins, this is half the data set, right? So I've downsampled, obviously on a data set with 300 and whatever, 22 data points, you don't need to downsample, but you get the idea. But this is just on my machine. This is on right localhost. This is on my laptop. I cannot show this to you unless I like walk my laptop over to you. So if I want to share this, there are a couple of options. There are many options, right? Today we're going to use something called QuartoPub. If any of you haven't played with it, it is a place where you can host public Quarto documents for free. So that's a pretty cool resource if you didn't know about it. It's a little bit like Shiny Apps, but like with Shiny Apps, there's a paid tier. There's no paid tier for QuartoPub, at least not yet. And so this is the test version of my app. You can tell because it says it is the test version, and because it has this great slug that includes test in the name. And so that's cool, right? Here I'm using the full data set, 333 data points. And then I've got the prod version, which is exactly the same, other than the fact that it was rendered like 30 seconds later, and that it's at the prod URL, right? So, and this is actually really important, that like test and prod should look really similar, right? You want as few differences as possible between test and prod, because very often the reason the dashboard goes down is differences between test and prod. So when you try to do that promotion, everything broke, right? So you want to really minimize those differences as much as possible. Okay, so let's make a change. Oops, I don't need to open Zoom. That's not what I'm doing right now. Let's make a change here. Who has a favorite ggplot theme other than minimal, since we're using minimal? Black and white. I figured we were going there. All right, so let's check out a new branch. We're going to call it theme for our new theme. We're going to commit this new theme change to new theme. New theme. New theme. Typing in front of a crowd, folks. So I'm going to commit that. Oh, got to hit the check mark. New theme, commit, and push. Push from the terminal. Okay, so now this is getting pushed, and this is where we are living on the edge because the Wi-Fi is spotty. Yeah, that's being slow. Okay, so I'll show off what would happen if we got to Git. So here is my Git repository, and I'll keep an eye on it in case that shows up, because I would like to show you what it looks like. Nope, no good. Nope, okay. Well, what would happen is I go ahead and make a pull request, and when I made the pull request, this action would kick off, right? It would start doing things, which is pretty cool. I'll show you one that rendered already. So this is a job that ran a little while ago. It takes about 2 minutes to run the job, which is, I think, pretty good, right? It's longer than I want to show you during a 20-minute talk, but really not very long in the scheme of like I'm trying to promote this into test. And you can see it does a bunch of different things, right? It sets up the job, it checks out the repository, it installs Quarto, right? So like you can think of it starting in totally like a bare server. I got to set up Quarto, I got to set up R, I got to install my R packages. I have to set up something so that it knows where to publish to, and then it's going to render and publish. And I believe it will tell us here where it's publishing to, right? So this published the test report that we looked at just a minute ago. Let's see if this has recovered. Oh, it did not. It just timed out. Oh, well. So this process pushed up to my test report. So okay. So now we've understood what we've done so far, right? We had our local change we made. We changed the theme. We were going to push that up to the test branch. It was going to do our testing. You would have seen and you would have loved that after the test ran, we could have merged it. And when we merged it, it was going to run another set of GitHub actions to push it to the prod branch, right? So that's like a pretty straightforward set of things. But like, how does it know how to do all that? How is that what happens? That's what we're going to get into for the last 8 minutes. Okay, so first, let's look at what's going on here with the config package. Remember I said like config is just a bunch of YAML, but we want to use it inside our R code, right? I used it here to downsample. So you can see I've got this config get, right? And when I do that, it loads up this config object. And you can see that is just, right, like it's a bunch of variables. It's just a bunch of R entities, right? It's a list, named list. And so that's pretty useful. So now I can just use that in my code. So for example, here, where I'm slicing out part of the data, right, I'm taking half of it in some cases, full in another. And then I have like the config name and that sort of thing. So how does it know to do this? Well, I've got my handy YAML file. It's YAML all the way down. So I've got in the YAML file, there are 3 definitions of environments. There's default, test, and prod, corresponding to dev, test, and prod. In config, they use the term default because that's sort of the fallback, right? If it's not specified elsewhere. And you can see that in the default, in the dev place, I sample down to a half of the data set. I've also got it configured so that goes to the test version of the report, right? If I were to go to the test configuration, right, there I go up to a full, 1, right, all of the sample. And then in the prod version, I add going to the production version of the report. So how does config know which package to pick up? Well, when I do config get, right, what this does is it looks at an environment variable. It's in my environment. And if you haven't spent a lot of time playing around with environment variables, they're like a really crucial part of how configuring multiple environments work, right? Like that is how things that are running know where they are, is by the environment variables that are set around them. So what I'm gonna do is here I'll manually just to show you sys.setEnv, and we'll set the variable it uses by default is rconfig active. And I'm going to set it to be test. So now when I set rconfig active to be test, and I'm going to run config get again, you can see now I'm picking up the test config, right? You can see my sample fraction has updated to 1. And so it's just, right, if we think back about our YAML, it's now selecting this middle block based on that environment variable that I had that is called test. That's how config works. Like that's the whole thing. It loads variables from a YAML file depending on the value of an environment variable. It's like super simple, but really powerful if you have multiple environments and want different things to be true in each environment. One other nice thing you can actually do is inside your config file, you can actually run R code as well, right? So these are all just like values that I'm typing here, but if there's something you need to do that's a little more complex, you can actually run R code inside your config. I don't recommend it do anything complicated, but sometimes it's useful to do other kinds of things. Like, for example, sometimes you want to have a password that gets passed through, but not appear in your config file, right? You could do a get the password from an environment variable and pass it right through inside your code. Okay, so that's the config piece of this, right? That's the dividing up the environments. Now the GitHub part. So by convention, in the .github workflows folder is where my GitHub actions go. And again, it's just YAML all the way down. And so what you'll see is if you look in this YAML file, it's all the things, right? If you remember here, this is all the big headers, right? Set up Quarto, install R package dependencies. These are those steps. They're just defined here, right? That's all this does. It defines those steps. And what it does is it can use other actions that people have predefined for me, right? I can use the actions check out a repository action. I can use the Quarto dev, right? That both GitHub and standalone people can define actions. So the Quarto developers have defined a setup Quarto action. The rlib group has defined a setup R action. And it actually allows me to provide a variable, right? What version do I want? I can also just run arbitrary code, right? So I think Mark, right? You were talking about running RScript, right? I can run RScript here right through GitHub Actions by just telling it to run that RScript. So that's really useful. So that's what this action does. Now, how does it know, right? Again, this is the test one. It knows it's the test one because I just have it set an environment variable here, right? You can define environment variables inside the definitions for your GitHub Actions flows. It works really nicely like that. And then the last piece is, when does this run? So this runs on a pull request when it opens or reopens, which is, right, that's what you would have seen if the Wi-Fi were being a little nicer. You would have seen that when I opened a pull request, the GitHub action checked off right away, and that's my testing workflow. This is also a really common workflow if you're doing things like linting your code, right? You can put that in here. Doing things like running test suites, really great to put in a pull request triggered action. And then there's another action, right? This one is identical. I will tell you, you can look through if you want to, but the only difference here is that it's using the prod config, and it runs actually on a push to the main branch, right? And a completed merge is a push to the main branch, right? So that's actually what it's really going to be triggered on. You can do more complex things like nesting them with variables, but the syntax gets kind of complicated, and I didn't want to have to explain the syntax, nor actually figure it out for myself. So you can do that, but I just duplicated the same action twice. Just to show you a little bit of what these actions look like. So if you look, for example, this is the rlib actions setup R action. You can see they define all of these various variables, and I'll zoom in a little bit. But you can see like they give you that the R version you can use. You can set the number of CPUs, all these kinds of things you can set, and they just sort of list them right in the help for for that action. I don't think this pushed at this point, but let's double check. Maybe we can show it real quick. No, still not pushing. Oh, well. Great. So that was mostly what I wanted to show you today. So just to recap a little bit of where we've been. Okay, so the bottom line, use config and environment variables to differentiate your different environments, right? One from the other. Use Git to manage when things move, right? The trigger is a Git branching strategy. And so like I said back towards the beginning, right? Having good Git practices is kind of a prerequisite for this, or at least something you should do along with this. Sometimes I see people where this is actually a really good motivation to set up good Git practices, right? Like if your Git practices only matter because you're like, we're going to do Git, it's like kind of hard to care. But if it's like do good Git or else you're going to break the CI/CD, that's a much stronger motivator. Sometimes this can actually really go along nicely if you're trying to get people to use Git in a more powerful and intentional way. And then use CI/CD, GitHub Actions to do promotion mechanics. Since I do work for Posit, I would be remiss if I didn't just say that Posit, I'm so used to saying RStudio, it's very hard to change my language. It's been really difficult. Posit Connect can do parts of this for you, right? Posit Connect can do the thing where it watches the Git repo and picks up the changes for you. So you don't have to have a GitHub action. That's personally my favorite feature of Connect, is that it can do that part for you. The other thing I will share is if you thought this was cool and you were interested in this, I am writing a book. It's called DevOps for Data Science. It is drafted. The writing is still rough, but the entire book exists. It's online at do4ds.com. And if you're extra double interested, John Harmon, who maybe is watching online and has been mentioned a number of times, is actually running a book club where some folks are reading it. So if you're interested, you can reach out to John, and I'm sure they would be happy to have another couple people in their book club. Thank you very much, everybody.